Yeah, that's all right. But if I make it, yeah.
So yeah, I'll hand it over to Jamie.
Cheers. Yeah, thank you. Sorry, what's your name, mate?
Adam.
Thank you, Adam. Thanks for taking the meeting. Thanks for everyone's done service, Ian. Thanks for asking me to share. And I was, I'm nice to see, you know, walked in and know a couple of people's faces. You know, I've done a bit of work for Sarah a few years back, and like that sort of represents NA. You know, I always seem to bump into someone and have that familiarity, no matter what town you're in. And I met Ian a few years ago, like, you know, and it's funny because I got reconnected with Ian a few years back because he set up something from where I'm from back home, like, you know, and I was part of that because where I'm from a little small island, a place called the Isle of Man. Some of you might have heard of it where they do the motorbikes, you know, and it's, you know, brought up there, you know, I fell into addiction there, and I couldn't really get clean there, if I'm honest. You know, there was no NA, there was no one that walked a recovery sort of path that you could aspire to. It just wasn't there, you know, and I remember I first come into the fellowship and I went to a convention. I was like only a couple of days in, and I was like, you know, just going along with the rides, and Ian, I can't remember, but Ian gave me his number, like, you know, come up and do that thing we do, like, and then when I reconnected with him, he said, I'll get your details, and his number was in my phone, like, do you know what I mean? I was like, oh fuck me, how's that? And then sort of come back to me, like, you know, and he asked me to share, like, you know, on step 9, and it's mad because, well, he gave me an option of a couple of steps, and I said, like, step 9, and the reason I said step 9 is because, like, you know, it's where I got my, this is what I feel, you know, it's where I got my connection with Narcotics Anonymous. I had my NA hit sort of thing, you know what I mean, that spiritual awakening within step 9, do you know what I mean? And it was, I wasn't really expecting it, I didn't understand it, but, you know, I felt like, you know, not until I had it, you know, something was lacking. And when I got that connection with the amends process, I don't know, it locked me in. And I'd been in Narcotics Anonymous a long time before that, you know, I've been clean 7 years, but I've been here 13, like, you know, I had a few years, I'd done the dance, I came here scripted, didn't want it, you know, I found some stuff to say, oh fuck that, you know, and go back out the door with, you know, but it was never about what I was reading, it was about, I just wasn't ready and I was needing excuses to carry on, you know, and, you know, when I think of the word, like, sorry, I just think, like, you know, I saturated that word, do you know what I mean? It was just part of my routine, really, do you know what I mean? It was part of my default set, and it was just like, you know, you'd have whatever you did in the morning to get going, you know, and then say sorry sometimes throughout the day of some sort. And then it's like, I remember going into like detoxes, you know, trying to get clean, never through 12-step, but just other areas. And it, like, as soon as I was allowed my phone call, I was saying sorry straight away, you know, 3 days, I'll never do that again. And I remember my sister saying to me once, didn't you say that last time? You know, and it's just like, you know, then sort of the reality sort of kicks in. You know, I believe, you know, I heard this from someone else, and a lot of stuff I'll say, you know, is from other people's experiences that I've started to feel over time. And it's like, you know, it's there, step 9's there for a reason, isn't it? It's a bit further down the line, you know, and it's about, you know, I think Narcotics Anonymous for me, I said a lot of the words in Narcotics Anonymous before I understood them. Do you know what I mean? I was sort of like that, acting as if it was a language I didn't really, it was a language I had to learn, you know, with the feelings that were connected to the words, and that didn't happen instantly for me. It really didn't. You know, I was saying clean without that sort of connection, I suppose. I was doing all right, but I don't think it's instant. You know what I mean? I think for me it was a process, and it, like, you know, it says in step 9, you know, you can always home in on the amends that are a good experience to you, but not all amends, you know, go how you'd like them to go, because we say, you know, it's about the willingness, you know, it's sort of like an outcome, but you don't really long for it. And what I do understand around like step 9 now is it's about the willingness, isn't it? It's about ridding, you said it in that reading, it's about, you know, getting rid of your guilt and getting rid of your shame, and the willingness to say sorry, and the outcomes are relevant, you know. And that's for me, that was a hard thing to sort of understand, because I want to say but, you know what I mean, I want to say but I was this, I was that, you know what I mean. And it's like, and I've had some experiences, you know, in the fellowship that like can't really work out, you know, quite cynical, about the spiritual awakening sort of thing, you know, a little bit like, you know, I need that concrete evidence, I need something to do it. And people would talk, you know, before, you know, the people that were here a long time before me would talk about these sort of spiritual awakenings and stuff, and I'd be like, well, I ain't getting anything here, do you know what I mean? And it reminded me of me like my drug use, I think, because like, you know, I remember sitting in rooms and taking the same drug as everyone else and still think mine wasn't working, do you know what I mean? And I had that sort of experience in recovery a little bit for a while, and you know, obviously I'd done a lot of harms, a lot of hurts and stuff like that, and I remember like, you know, I'd done loads of stuff, you know, like all of us had when we were in addiction, we harm and hurt, but a lot of it I didn't know I was harming and hurting, because I was so wrapped up in being a victim, you know. I was like, I had to detox from that first of all, do you know what I mean, to allow me to see anything else, because it was like, it was my default setting, it came with my using, do you know what I mean? It was like I had to, because I had no choice, because of this, because of that, you know, and I had plenty of evidence to carry on, I suppose. And like, you know, being around, you know, and starting to sort of learn what the amends is around. On my, like, I remember the first time round when I done step 9, you know, I was like, I found it really hard to write down like what I'd done. Do you know what I mean? It was like, well, but, you know, and I had plenty of that, you know, and then like when I sort of reconnected with MNA after having a bit of time here, you know, I it's mad really, because I used to trade on like a lot of stuff about, like, you know, I was in a relationship for a number of years, I've got 2 children, I had them in active addiction, you know, and I remember like when they were born, you know, I was using in the toilet, all that sort of stuff we hear again and again, you know, that I pretty fitted into that role, you know. I couldn't handle any feeling without using, you know what I mean, and sometimes when there'd be something magical happen, you know, when I think of my children, I've never once sat down and planned anything, you know. I've always acted with, you know, call it self-will, call it what you want, you know. I had kids, I never sat there and thought I'm going to have children. I just got someone pregnant, do you know what I mean? And, you know, and the girl that I'd met had just come out of the back of a rehab. Again, she worked in the local boozer. It wasn't a 12-step rehab, you know. I was in there, as soon as you know, do something, I was back drinking again. And I met this girl and she worked behind the bar, you know, like in it, you know, we were out on the lash and stuff like that. I just come off the back of, you know, a 10-year heroin habit, and you know, started drinking. I hadn't made that connection about alcohol as a drug, you know. I've never been drink dependent, but when I drink, I score, you know. I know that today, you know, it's not enough for me. And we sort of went on this, like, you know, this sort of booze sort of cruise, if you like, you know, and we just met on that, and children came and presented. By the time the kids were born, I was flat out using again, you know, and I brought this girl into that lifestyle, you know. She wasn't an addict, you know, she still does what she does now as a drink, you know, she ain't that well, but, you know, when you have children with someone, you know, you can go away, but, you know, they're always there sort of thing, you know what I mean? And, you know, and it's mad really, because we were together for like 11 years, and I think, you know, and a lot of that was when I was using. I know, you know, I was flat out using, and I think, you know, when I look back now, I was wondering how we lasted so long. And I think, you know, she wasn't very capable, I suppose, in areas. And you know, when I went into that relationship, if you like, bit of an alpha male, you know, I worked, I was a hunter-gatherer, I'd get the stuff together, I provide and stuff, but slowly, as addiction does it, you know, it robbed me of all that ability. And what I found was, I think she stayed with me because she had more fear of being on her own with 2 children than staying with me, you know, and that's what it went for a long time. And in that process, you know, the harms and the hurts sort of all came, the robbing, the pillaging, you know. I remember she used to get benefits, like, you know, because like, you know, like family allowance and stuff like that. And this was before of like, you know, we had like, you know, online banking and all that, you know, and I'd always nick a fucking card. And on the night when she went to bed, I'd always nick a card, and I knew what day the benefits dropped, and I'd fucking always take the same amount out every fucking week, you know, so she wouldn't know it, and she was never aware of it. And I remember, you know, and there's that sort of behaviour, you know. I did that for a number of years, like, and I remember like I'd go out, and there was times before I couldn't work, I'd work, and I'd go and I'd use all my gear, and then she'd come home and ask for a bit of maintenance, and I'd kick off, you know what I mean, for the slightest bit of maintenance. Fucking, you know, I'd look for the excuse to kick off. So fucking justify that, you know, and I just spent hundreds of pounds, like, you know, on whatever I was doing. And we never had a joint bank account. It was always that secret of, you know, so I could carry on using, you know, and it went on for a long time, you know. And I remember, like, you know, when I come out of treatment last time, I went to a 12-step treatment centre, you know, and like, I'd had a little, you know, I'd had a bit of time in NA and I'd relapsed again, and I came in this treatment centre. And I remember when I came out of the treatment centre, and we were, you know, hostile and stuff like that a little bit, but we were together because, you know, we got 2 children together, and my daughter's like, she's autistic, she's fucking hard work, she really is, she's still, you know, hard work to this day. She has a lot of needs. I've had a terrible week with her this week, very up and down, self-harm and all that stuff, but, you know, she was going through a really difficult time. She's been sectioned under the Mental Health Act, so, you know, I had a lot of guilt, and a lot of times, you know, I'd go back as a father on guilt more than feelings. Do you know what I mean? There was a lot of that there, you know, and I was, you know, I didn't really realise I had kids till I got clean. Do you know what I mean? They were there, but I never really had that responsibility. And I remember, like, you know, coming out of treatment, and I remember coming out of treatment, and she said to me, like, I've met someone else, you know, like that. And I remember, you know, in that moment, in that time, I felt wronged. Do you know what I mean? And what was going on for me was just that rejection, that abandonment, that core sort of stuff we hear about, you know. And I've been asked for years why I took drugs, and I can never answer it. I'd just be like, I'm addicted, I can't help it, you know. I could never get past that. I remember driving around the corner, and I stopped my motor. I wasn't long out of treatment, and it's for the first time ever I knew why I took drugs. Do you know what I mean? Because it's the first time ever I'd caught my feelings instead of talking about them in hindsight. I was in the feelings, I was in the pain, I was in the rejection. And I had this moment where it was fucking physical. It was like I was having palpitations. And I remember I sat round there, and I remember how fucking intense it was. And I had a moment where I thought, fucking hell, I want to get through this. I want to fucking get through this. I don't want to do. And I sort of caught all my behaviours, that spontaneous thing that I'd always done, you know, run to the crutch, you know, I caught it. And I fucking felt it, and I knew what I was doing, I knew what was happening. I didn't feel it, I wasn't going, that's great, I'm all that, you know. I knew I had to arrest the process that I'd always done. You know, numerous things I'd used off, but it was all them feelings, that vulnerability of knowing where I was at. And I remember, like, you know, so when I got to step 9, you know, we had to, like, co-parent together, you know, through this sort of, I'd say, breakup. You know, we hadn't been together for years. You know, that's the truth. We'd never, you know, it wasn't all amazing, and then, you know, it was fucking long drawn out. It was me coming to believe of the reality, you know, through going through the steps, seeing that it'd never been there, it never happened. And I remember, you know, getting to the step 9, and we'd had to co-parent through this thing. I remember I had to go down the house, and I see this bloke's car outside my house, because I had my kids every other weekend, and I'd go down, and I'd have to phone someone in an just to get through the fucking drive to get the kids. You know, it was just hard. But I was getting through it, and that was the thing. And, you know, my sort of step 9, you know, first, as I went through the steps, through this breakup, you know, I read that step work out now with sponsees, you know, I give them a bit when I'm doing it, and I could see the obsession and compulsion, you know, like, you know, one of the hardest things I've ever to put down is a woman, you know, that obsession and compulsion. And I remember I could see the obsession through the steps, you know, when I was working it, we'd always come back to the questions because I could relate to them feelings. And I remember, like, sort of doing it. And, you know, when she got to step 9, she was first on my list, because I got to a place of sort of peace, and, like, you know, and I'd write down there, and I thought, how do I make an amends? And I was doing the actions of amends, you know what I mean? I'd come out, I took responsibility, you know, I was having me kids every other weekend, I was paying me maintenance, it would always turn down, but I'd also stole a lot that she wasn't aware of, do you know what I mean? And it was about that sort of stuff. And, like, you know, I approached her with an amends, and she's like, I don't want to fucking hear it. Do you know what I mean? She's like, you know, she sort of shies away from, you know, I don't talk to her like we talk to her, you know, around it and stuff like that. And I was like, you know, I had to do this sort of ongoing amends. And how I had to do it was, you know, when I was growing up, you know, my parents, like, you know, I was from a small island, you know, was full of guilt and shame. Everyone knew about it. I remember my mum had an affair behind my dad's back. And she was putting the paper for it for adultery. You know, it was fucking mental. You know, that's where I was from. And I remember the shame building from that. My mum, you know, the shame my mum had, and she was drinking heavy at the time. And I remember seeing her, like, getting pulled out of a shop once with all my mates, you know, I was so fucking embarrassed. And I remember, like, so she had a lot of it going on, but my dad, you know, he couldn't handle his feelings, and, like, they fucking hated each other, you know. And I was from a small island, you know. I remember as a child, you know, any event that happened where, you know, there was everything together, I'd be in loads of fear and anxiety of managing their feelings. And I was very, very aware of this. And, you know, they've sort of inspired me, and they don't know fucking how, do you know what I mean, around how not to be. And I remember how that felt as a child. And them experiences that I had myself spurred me on. I don't want to have that for my children. I don't want to do that. I want to do something different. And, you know, so on my amends with my partner, it was, you know, some basic stuff that you should do anyway as a parent. You know, I was lucky enough to have the opportunity of another go with my children, of being a father, you know, and that's an amends in itself, you know, to do that, because my kids suffered bad from when I was younger. And I remember, like, I'd have to do this ongoing amends with is that 5 minutes already? Is it? This ongoing amends with her around, you know, getting back together. And she met a new partner. I ended up, like, sort of doing a lot of stuff with them and going into it. And you know, I remember she was living with this bloke, and she'd asked me to do stuff in the house, and I'm a carpenter. And I remember I'd have to go in there. I remember, this is mad, right? I was so sort of free from it. She asked me to put a bed up for her on Valentine's Day, and I was like, yeah, I'll do that. So I'm doing this bed up for her, and I'm thinking, it's fucking Valentine's Day, she's probably going to get fucking smashed with this. Like, doing it. But, you know, I had this moment where I felt completely fucking free from it. And it's mad, because I had this moment and I just felt sort of free, you know. But I was going to, like, there's another, you know, I didn't want to just drop a load of amends story on you, really, you know what I mean, around that. Because, you know, amends is very, very up and down, you know. And I've made amends where I've tried, and the only thing I've come up against is, the only thing I've got from it is my willingness. And there was just another amends I just wanted to mention. Like, I remember someone started a meeting to make an amends to his housing estate back home, like, you know what I mean, because he caused carnage. And, you know, where we started a meeting up back home, like, you know, because there's no narcotics, and it just started, where there was a meeting started and then it stopped, and we managed to get into the jail now, you know. And I'm part of HNI that we go in on Zoom and stuff like that, and I've got a sponsor in jail, and you know, back home, and, you know, I was on a Zoom meeting this morning. And, like, you know, there's more people getting clean in jail than there is on the outside, you know, through this meeting, and, you know, and I understand that, and I get this sort of process of amends around that. And then when I was writing my step 8, I remember there was one bloke, you know. When I think about amends, it's like I've done loads of stuff that I don't really feel the attachment of guilt and shame to. A lot of stuff, I believe, you know, especially in addiction, sort of cancels stuff out. But my nearest and dearest is different. But I remember once, this is the mad thing, and this is where I got a real spiritual experience. I remember there was this one guy. I remember, you know, you hear that cliche story, I'm the type of addict that would rob your wallet and help you look for it. You know, that experience, like, happened to me in Liverpool. There was this kid that I was with, that I was really good friends with as a kid, and he was a nice kid. You know, he weren't flat out in addiction. I remember we went to the Liverpool match, and I was in the cop, right, and I knew we had a load of money on him, because he was going back to the army. And I remember it surged forwards, the match, and I remember I fucking dipped his wallet. I had his wallet, and we were all together, like, you know. And this is, I remember going in, and I had a habit at the time, you know, and I remember going in to the beat, and he went, shit, I've lost my wallet. And he was in the army, and he was going back to Germany. He had loads of, like, army credentials in it, and because I stole his wallet, he got really disciplined for it, and everyone was looking for it. And I had loads of friends around me that knew about it, and these were all friends that I sort of grew up with. And I remember, you know, there's something about that kid that I could never forget, and I had a lot of guilt and shame around it, you know, because he was a victim, you know, in every capacity. There's nothing I could justify it for. He was just a nice guy. And I remember, like, I hadn't spoken to him for 20 years, right? And I put him on my step 8. He just come into my head from nowhere. I wasn't thinking hard and deep. He just come into my head because I was connected with the guilt and shame of it. And I remember I stuck him on my step 8. And this is not a word of a lie. There's no exaggeration here. I put him on my step 8, and about half an hour later, his friend requested me. Right, it's fucking mental. I know, and it's not, you know. I know we have the juju shit in here, and everyone buys into it. But he friend requested me on step 8 when I put him on my list, and I couldn't believe it. And this is one that I'd carried, and I remember doing it, you know, and I accepted his friend request. Yeah, I'll finish it now. I remember his friend request, and he gave me, and I remember phoning him up, and he's like, "Oh, great, yeah." I said, "Do you mind if I phone you?" And he said, "Yeah, of course, it'd be nice to chat away." And I'm thinking, "Fuck, I've got to drop this on him," you know. And I nicked about 350 quid, you know. I don't know, that was roughly what I said. And I remember I told him up, and I said, "I need to talk to you." He's like, "What?" You know, and I was like, "That's when I've worked it." And I said, "Remember, you know," and the thing about this one was, what it was for me was, what I was connected to the fear was, I had a real fear of judgment around it, because no one knew about this. It's not something I've been nicked for or caught for and had to own. You know, it's something that the only person that knew it was me. And there was a lot of our friends who I would probably be aware. I had loads of fear around the judgment of it, you know, dog move and all that sort of stuff. And I remember, like, you know, I told them what I did, you know, and that leap of faith, like, you know, doing it. And, you know, it was so hard for me to say, but, you know, I was this, I was that. And he said, and I remember he turned around and he said to me, he said, why did you do that to me? He said, I was always really good with you when we were younger. You know, why did you do that? And I was like, you know, I don't know what to say. I said, I'm really sorry, and I want to be able to say sorry. I'd like to give you the money back. Yeah, fucking right, you can. He sent me his bank details straight away. Yeah, I was like, so I'm just getting a new drive. That's fucking not, you know. I did what I did, like give him the dough, you know, and then just put the bed, and he put off of me, and I had so many mixed emotions around it. I felt the guilt, I felt the shame, I felt the embarrassment, but I also felt free, right, you know, because it was a suggested thing and I'd done it, and he gave it away. And it's mad, you know, this one, he phoned me up 2 weeks later, right, and he has a drink and that, and he had me on fucking speakerphone with a load of people there. I'll finish up now. He had me on speakerphone with a load of people there, and he went, "Oh, here he is now," and I'm thinking, fucking hell, here we go, you know what I mean, full of drink and that. And his missus come on the phone, and she said to me, we just think, and these are fucking civilians, you know what I mean, they're not in our world. And she said to me, we just thought that was like really sort of brave of you to do that, and we just want to, and I was like, you know, in that, I don't want to go into I don't want to make it about, you know, but I just, that's where I got belief in Narcotics Anonymous, from that experience there. You know, my amends with my ongoing partner is, you know, I do that on a daily basis. You know, we co-parent together, and I have a lot of freedom from that, from being around there. But that, to me, just concreted me into the belief in Narcotics Anonymous, and that's what I'd always been seeking for a number of years, you know, and it just cemented me in. Do you know what I mean? I just thought this stuff works, you know, and I'm a willing sort of member. I'll leave it there. Cheers.
Oh, nice. Thank you very much.